The only police officer charged over the fatal of Black American woman Breonna Taylor has been acquitted. Key points: Detective Brett Hankison was the only officer charged in the case. Detective Brett Hankison was the only officer charged in the case. Louisville's mayor says the verdict adds to the frustration and anger of many in the city. Louisville's mayor says the verdict adds to the frustration and anger of many in the city. Mr. Hankerson's lawyer says police have a right to defend themselves. On Thursday, local time, a Kentucky jury acquitted a white former detective of endangering neighbors of Ms. Taylor during a botched raid that her in her home. The decision cleared law enforcement of all criminal liability in a case that rocked the United States in 2020. Detective Brett Hankison, 45, was charged with wanton endangerment after his stray bullets hit a neighboring apartment in the city of Louisville during the execution of a no-knock search warrant after midnight. He was the only officer charged in the case. Mr. Hankison could be heard sobbing behind his face mask as the verdict was read 3 times, one for each of the occupants of the neighboring apartment, according to a court TV reporter who was in the courtroom. Relatives of Ms. Taylor, who were in the gallery, also wept, the reporter said. The jury deliberated for about 3 hours after hearing closing arguments on Thursday at the conclusion of a 1-week trial at Jefferson County Circuit Court. Helped fuel 2020 protests. The death of Ms. Taylor, an emergency medical technician who was unarmed, was one in a trio of cases that fueled a summer of protests against racial injustice and police violence 2 years ago. The other cases resulted in guilty verdicts for the deaths of 2 black men in 2020, George Floyd in Minneapolis and Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia. The death of Breonna Taylor, at the hands of police, has helped to spark protests across the United States. AP, Timothy D. Easley. Those convictions had offered a measure of justice after black activists and victims have said their protests against racial violence were largely ignored before the advent of mobile phone video. In this case, a grand jury cleared the 2 white officers who shot Ms. Taylor, but charged Mr. Hankison for endangering neighbors in the adjacent apartment. A grand juror on the case later said Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron only presented the wanton endangerment charges against Mr. Hankison to the grand jury. That meant the only trial to result from her death hinged on whether a police officer was justified in firing his weapon upon hearing a barrage of gunfire. Justice has still not been achieved. Today's decision adds to the frustration and anger of many over the inability to find more accountability for the tragic events of March 13, 2020, Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher said in a statement. I know that for many, justice has still not been achieved. Police wanted to search the home in connection with a drug investigation in which Ms. Taylor's ex-boyfriend was a suspect. After police broke down Ms. Taylor's door, her new boyfriend, fearing a break-in and saying he did not hear police identify themselves, fired 1 shot from a handgun that wounded an officer. That officer and another returned fire 22 times. Officer was doing his job, lawyer. In tearful testimony on Wednesday, Mr. Hankison said he mistakenly believed his fellow officers were coming under heavy fire. He shot 10 times from outside the apartment. Tennis player Naomi Osaka wore a mask with Breonna Taylor's name on it during the US Open. AP, Frank Franklin too. I think it was absolutely the fact that he was doing his job as a police officer, defense attorney Stu Matthews told reporters after the verdict, according to the Louisville Courier-Journal. The jury felt like, you go out and perform your duty and your brother officer gets shot, you've got a right to defend yourself. Ms. Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer, left without commenting, the Courier-Journal said. Ms. Taylor's family in 2020 won a $16 million wrongful death settlement from the city of Louisville. ABC Wires.